So we're back again at DonDiva Coaching, Talk Radio Coaching, Evening Edition, and we're going to finish off with the part two of part one of two of the reasons why a hostile relationship, offboarding, divorce, or leaving someone in a hostile relationship or abusive relationship, why it's important to understand the cycles and how it is important and imperative when you're divorcing someone emotionally abusive to recognize the signs of emotional abuse and then financial abuse, economic abuse, and coercive control, and also understanding how emotional abuse applies into that and emotionally abusive divorce as well and how that's being done because understanding emotional abuse is part of that. So we went into the pentameters of how the emotional scarring comes from and how that happens when you have narc hole and then you have narc hole 2. That's the narc by proxy. So when you're thinking about that, you're thinking about how a person is sitting up there trying to leave someone. They may have added a third party into the situation. So that adds more poisonous sauce into the pentameter of offboarding from either a marriage, bad marriage, emotionally abusive marriage, financially abusive marriage, or a coercive control marriage, or even a physically abusive marriage. So then you're talking about the levels of homicide, which we were talking about in the last session, that can happen, or the physical abuse and things like that. And so we were talking about how the temporary restraining orders turn into permanent restraining orders or lifetime restraining orders, depending on the dynamics of how that's going in that relationship and offboarding of that relationship. Because we think about why do couples divorce? Usually because one or both partners believe that ending the marriage relationship or long-term relationship will free them to create a happier, emotionally healthier lives for themselves or their children, if there's any children, or if pets are involved or whatnot, or anything in between. If family members are involved in the situation and it's becoming a multi-dynamic, multi-part, multi-perpetrator situation, it becomes a level of divorcing the person because you either hate their family or you hate them, and it's becoming levels of hostility and animosity to the point that there needs to be levels and depths of divorcing everybody involved because it's becoming toxic. It's becoming a level of tit for tat, or it's becoming a level of overlooked things like emotional abuse, and that's what's adding more fuel to the fire and possibility of what you see on TV, like the Fatal Attraction, Fatal Vows, or you're seeing levels and depths of when you see on Oxygen the Betty Broderick story where she snapped, or you're seeing Marissa Alexander, Centoya Brown, people who end up abused or in a bad situation, and it's emotional abuse there, physical abuse, economic abuse, or some level of abuse going there, and the psychological warfare that's normally not set for civilian. So you're thinking about that versus you're talking about other things, and we're not going to get into that because it's not thing y'all need to understand or know. But we're going to go to the levels of civilian. So we're talking about regular domestic. So when you're thinking of your spouse shouldn't be a terrorist. Your relationship shouldn't make you think of your spouse or the significant other in your relationship as a terrorist or a catalyst for terrorizing or terrorizing you as a person, myself or anyone else, or like Betty Broderick with her husband, offboarding, and she's economically what I call dependent on him for alimony. So then that's where the coercive control comes in, and those mitigating factors for an abuser to do all of that, emotional Munchausen by proxy, or the narc hole by proxy, which is the wife, the new one, who comes in and she listens to the husband tell her all kind of stuff, which is a smear campaign. So we're talking about technology abuse now in the future where people are starting to use that as means, and I gave you examples of that in my situation where I was dealing with someone who was an IT background and had connections with police departments and sheriff's departments and was able to do whatever he wanted to do, and nobody ever arraigned him, and he was able to just continue to terrorize, provoke, gaslight, and it was hard for me to prove until I got smart enough to start learning myself how he was doing it, tracing the router, tracing different things, tracing the network, starting to find the devices, starting to find what he was doing, and starting to find the device hacking, starting to find the applications he was using to do it, and finding every number I had, calling phones, provoking, gaslighting, morning, noon, and night, emotional abuse. So when you're thinking about those type of levels of depths of emotional abuse, so we're going to go into recognizing an emotionally abusive spouse or common law spouse or a relationship long term that's just, it's time to end it because there's no levels and depths of I'm sorry or nothing's going to fix it financially. There's levels of animosity that if you do get back together, it's an episode of snapped on site. And you're thinking about those different things like people will parrot you, right? Or they'll use IT hacking ways to parrot you and emotionally torment and play those type of games outside of your home-based business, or if you're outside of your home and have a place of business, rerouting your phone lines. Like I gave you guys examples of emotional abuse. And when you're offboarding in a divorce and a person trying to crazy make, we'll use those examples. So when you're on social media telling people what's going on, people who aren't aware of emotional abuse or how it works, or a person who's wealthy or well-connected who's using technological abuse. So we'll go over that before we go over the levels of how the emotional abuse is done and recognizing it, because I wanted to go over technological abuse so you guys understand that, and how to handle a toxic divorce, because that's part of that too as well. So using technology to abuse, like thermostats, locks, lights, digital tools of domestic abuse. And in a training of sessions of domestic violence and technology, people have started asking how to handle the use of connected home devices in abuse situations. Example, Erica Olson. She was a safety net project of the National Network to End Domestic Violence. People who called into the help hotline in domestic violence shelters said they felt as if they were going crazy. One woman had turned on her air conditioner and said it had been switched off without her touching it. And the code numbers of the digital lock on her front door changed every day, and she could not figure out why. And those are examples of what happened to me. It was happening morning, noon, and night, where I would come back from doctor's appointments. The speakers, internet connected locks, speakers, thermostats, lights, and cameras have been used, right? And using IT or access points to go and override it, and then sit there, unlock the doors, get in the house, damage stuff, and damage walls, and continue to provoke gaslight stuff. And so things such as locks, speakers, thermostats, lights, and cameras have been marketed with the newest convenience, but also being used for means of harassing, monitoring, revenge, and control, meaning eavesdropping, and cyber stealth, cyber bait, and provoke, and parroting. So in that, abusers using apps like on their smartphones, which are connected to the internet-enabled device, could remotely control everyday objects in the home, sometimes watch and listen, other times scare or show power or coercive control. The things that I've been saying and documenting for years and whatnot, and it took police that sat there and crazy made me forever and a day, and I would tell them what's going on. How could somebody be doing that? Because we Barney fight, because they can. And they will do it, and they will IT hack and IP hack, and I told you. So, I hate calling Barney Five. But, most small town police officers wouldn't want to believe that. Then when it was going across state lines, when I moved to a bigger city and it was still going on, and then the guy I was living with was like, how can this be happening? And it was happening in the place that we were living in another state. And I was like, well, you tell me. And I'm like, okay, either you're doing it. He's like, I'm not doing it. I'm like, okay. All right. So at this point, okay, I have no choice but to believe you, but I'm starting to feel like I'm being crazy, mate, because you have an IT background, and that would make me mistrust you, but I have a narco ex that stalked me where I moved to with my IT connected friend at that time. So then we're talking about another ex of mine prior who has a sheriff's department daddy who has an IT background but built the connector for the small town we lived in prior. He built the connector to the police department and the sheriff's department. So there we go. Aha! Narco 1, Narco 2. Okay, so we're talking about psychological abuse and torment. Then I have Narco 3. Prior ex, 10 years, who said he's going to make my life a living hell, for lack of better words. So here we go. Psychological punches. Scream. Psychological punches. Here we go. How many intervals of crazy make have we gone now with this, right? So the only person who's questionable about is he telling the truth or not is the last one. So I'm thinking, are you narc hole number 4? So at this point, I'm like, Finish him. So we're at that point, right? So we're thinking, I'm getting psychological punches every which way there is possible. I go and live with the last person, so is he narc hole or not? At this point, I'm about to drove to drinking. I don't even drink. Catch some teas. I don't even drink. So we're talking about levels of psychological abuse. Who's easy to catch the blame? Our IT people, right? Because they have access and they have knowledge how to do this, right? But so does a wealthy, disgusting douchebag, the one for 10 years that I didn't know worked at the police department. Okay, here we go, narco. So now you understand me as a coach and me being able to educate you on this, how it's easily that somebody can use a device and hack. And then you're going ring around the narc hole. So we're going to play duck, duck, narc. Duck, duck, narc. Duck, duck, narc. Duck, duck, narc. Okay, so now we've gone through the intervals of duck, duck, narc. Alright. So abusers using their apps on their smartphones, then internet-enabled devices, and then we're thinking to ourselves, okay, we've gone duck, duck, narc. So now I'm the sitting duck, right? So duck, duck, goose. So my goose is cooked, right? Duck, duck, narc. With levels of narc. So are we tired of psychological punches? Are we tired of crazy mates? Are we tired of psychological punches? Are we at hostile? Are we at hostile? Are we at punches? Yeah, because we're tired. So they're eroding your resolve to be nice, right? So whereas the person saying, screaming, hollering on the internet, right? It happens to the best of us because their resolve to be professional, nice, has been eroded. So what are we going to have in a hostile divorce? An emotional abuse-ridden divorce. So what is the wealthy narc doing? Duck, duck, narc. Not funny, is it? Okay. So we've gone through the pentameter of how that's being done. So, recognizing emotional abuse during a divorce. And that means whether or not you're married or not. Together, but separate. And raising kids off-boarding from a narc hole. Or narc hole by proxy, which would be the new narc hole, who believes everything the narc is saying. Primary narc 1, narc 2. So you've got narc A and narc B by proxy. So that's where you're looking at how Betty Broderick went through the same thing. So when you think about all of this, we're going to go under understanding emotional abuse. And they'll erode the will, esteem, and support systems of their partners in order to control. So we're going to give you a prime example. So when I was going through this, I went to my people, and they're like, what? You done lost your rabbit ass mind. And, excuse the language, I'm thinking to myself, like, nobody's going to believe me. And this narc pretty much had said it. Nobody's going to believe you. You're not going to win. How? Could I win if you're doing it remote? You're doing it by technology. Of course you don't want me to win because you want to win in court and tell lies. So when you're thinking about these different things that go on in court, and these ongoing battles that last a long time, when you got a wealthy narc who's got probably property, land, and things that you had prior and whatnot, that narc's not trying to let that go, right? So if your spouse is emotionally abusive, you're likely excruciatingly aware of the pain caused by the person. So that's what we meant by the emotional head punches, right? So, however, you might not be as clear as the specific methods employed by abusers to keep their victims down or upset or constantly reacting. So being able to identify the harmful ways by which the emotional abusers break your will or try to break your will in those cases. So you're looking at Betty Broderick, her husband and her narc by proxy, which is his second wife, who was benefiting from that because they want to get custody of the kids. He doesn't want to pay alimony. So what is he going to do? Erode her will and her resolve. So what did she do? She snapped. So she shot him. She finished him. So we're thinking about this, and that's no laughing matter because this lady's sitting in jail. She's not sorry. Why is she not sorry? Because they pushed her over the edge. So, and when you're seeking a divorce from an emotional abuser, you'll likely see a number of disturbing behaviors from the spouse trying to kick it into overdrive during the process. So you're talking about habitual blaming. So not only will they reverse project everything that you're saying that they're doing, they'll reverse project it on you, but they're going to go and try to elicit evidence, false evidence, where you're seen on social media, cutting up, cussing them out, being upset. I've done it. Because they want it to be seen if they've already had you misdoxed or lied on. And there's cases in Columbia, South Carolina, Tennessee and Georgia, Florida, about the same exact things where a rich man did this to his wife and had her misdiagnosed, misdoxed, and then had the therapist paid off to do this. And this is what this wealthy narc did. So you got to understand how far he went with his insidiousness to have her misdoxed. She left the country, came back, and then the lawyer said she needs to sue her husband because he literally tried to erode her mental health. He even had the doctor in his back pocket. And by the time it was all said and done, luckily somebody believed her. And all the documentation was like, you know what? You need to sue your narc husband. I don't blame him. I don't blame the lawyer. Because if I would have been a lawyer in that instance, I would have said, you know what, lady, if you don't hurry up and sue him, I will on your behalf. Because at the level that he went to crazy make her and have her misdiagnosed and misdoxed is unfair and unethical and it wasn't right. That's legal abuse, emotional abuse, and tormenting someone to have a nervous breakdown or have them dragged into a facility and then misdoxed and then over-medicated and dang near. Those are the things that can happen for anyone. And it can happen to the best of us. There's doctors who've said that's happened with their narco husbands. Or, and the families of wives who've done it to their husbands. Why would you do that to someone? But when you think about that, blame is a tactic commonly used by emotionally abusive partners. Victims of this type of abuse often find themselves at fault for everything wrong from their abusers, from minor impediments such as a bad day at work to overreaching or over toxically shaming them for shortcomings, like failing to achieve financial things like stability, or if they're facilitating the financial stability downfalls or pitfalls. Example, I had my businesses when I first started. The narc IT hacked, IP hacked, messed up all kind of different stuff. He committed acts and levels of fraud, financial fraud, and guess what? It took forever and a day to prove it. And by the time that was done, all the damage was done. So then, but I was always being shamed while I was at it. It took years and years for me to build back and build back stronger than I ever have been. And now I'm in my coaching. Went through my certified coaching and everything else. I had to go through all of that. I went to college, got my bachelor's degree and everything. I studied narcissism because I wanted to know what it was. I didn't know what a narc was. I've been narked. So duck, duck, narc. My goose was cooked. I've been narked by Count Narcula. So you can understand how that feels. And sometimes you have to think about these things and you have to laugh to keep from crying. So I have to find the humor in the sickness that happened to me. So I'm trying to get you all who are listening to this to find a humor in a emotionally detrimental, torturous, arduous situation dealing with a narc, because they become deadly, they become homicidal, they become very vindictive, and they become vengeful and spiteful. It happened to me. They will go out their way to crazy make, they will access devices, they will do things with technology, and they will find ways to shut you up if they feel like you're revealing how they really are. And the sad part about it is I could have died from it. So if you think about Brady Broderick, in the case, she didn't die, they did. She snapped. I chose not to snap. I chose not to go out there and get my narc and narc them. You know what I'm saying? Reactive abuse syndrome and narcissistic abuse syndrome and snapping. So instead of me going out there and out narking the narc and the narc by proxy and the flying monkeys, I decided to recover. And I decided to go through this arduous hardship, get illuminated in my greater light, and in my journey of hardship, I learned how to go and touch my greater light and help other people. And that was why I created Caring Orchid, which is another charity that I have. And that's what I use as well to be able to help people who are going through domestic abuse who can't afford coaching services through DonDiva Coaching or TeamWorld.online for children and adolescents and young adults. So I give pro bono coaching and things like that through the facility, and each one of the doctors and each one of the MSWs that will be seeing a lot of you after you've seen me, who will be able to take on your cases outside of what I do, which is bridging the gap until I'm becoming an MD and I'll be able to diagnose you and prescribe and treat like that. They'll be able to prescribe and treat you and be able to get things done in-house, and we'll be able to help you walk through that. But there's some people who can't afford those services. There's some people who just don't have it. Some of them are rendered homeless by, like I said, Count Narcula or somebody like Count Narcula. I don't want to say my narc, but those narcs that I dealt with back to back in those serial situations of serial dating, of, like you're dating people, but you're not thinking that it's going to happen like this, because I was one of those that like to be in a long-term relationship. I didn't think that I was dealing with narcs until I had to study it, and then I realized, oh dang, I've been narked. I had to laugh to keep crying. I literally cried a lot. And that was the journey part of it, where I cried a lot about it, because I was like, I can't believe I've been narked. So at that point, I realized, okay, I've been narked. I can't get angry all the time. And believe it or not, the levels of illicit upset and the brokenheartedness and the levels of grief that I went through, and I'm still sometimes offboarding from that grief and the upset, is that I had to learn to become peaceful in it and get more elevated and illuminated in my light in that hardship, and realize that that's their problem. The best success I can have and revenge I can have on an arc is not doing anything that Betty Broderick did, but finding a way to cope and go past it and move past it and teach other people who are going through the same exact thing, the extreme levels of torment, provoke, gaslight that is done and gets done, even remote, is learning how to channel through it, because narcs don't care. They don't want to see you successful. They hate people like me, empaths, people who are striving past that, and they're being revealed for who they are, and inadvertently what goes on in the dark comes to the light, and they realize, oh, I've been outsmarted by an empath. Nothing a narc hates more is an empath that knows how to out-narc a narc. And the thing is, I'm not a narc. I had to look it up. So literally, I learned how to outmaneuver a narc. So that means out-narking a narc. So Count Narcula failed. And Count Narcula is mad. So what does Count Von Narcula want? Revenge. But at that point, I fear not and I follow light. And at the end of the day, my paradigms of coaching, I enthuse that light. And I want you guys to understand, you have to get to a point where you cope. You have to get to a point that you see a psychiatrist, psychologist, even if you're on pills for a while. And even if you have to go and get management with a coach, a therapist, MSW, even if you have to sit down on a couch and I'm saying, hey, what's going on? Well, what happened? I hate my husband. Okay, go on. What else do you need to talk to me about? Why do you want to divorce your husband? Because he's a narc-hole. Okay, why is he a narc-hole? So when they go into pentameter, or what I mean they, you all that are being coached, and you understand that when you're going through XYZ 3/4 and 4 of how Count Von Narcula, your Count Von Narcula, and narcs by proxy, flying monkeys are doing you, you'll be able to understand, and I can walk you through these steps here. And with that, you're understanding the superiority complex that the narc has, the entitlement the narc has, the control mechanisms the narc has, the levels and depths of divorcing an emotional abuser. And then on top of that, understanding all that. So we're going to go into the levels of that. So when you're talking about the superiority complex, it's another red flag. And those are things that go into that homicide red flags that I told you about, the 8 tiers in the last session. So you're talking about red flag emotional abuse when a spouse treats their spouse as inferior or the lesser. And then when you think about this, often this is a process is twofold, where the abuser is both boosting themselves while putting the other partner down. So in an emotionally abusive, hostile divorce, what is the narc hole doing? The narc hole wants you to feel like you're less than them, and that they're owed the superiority complex, that they want to have you feeling inferior or the lesser or meeker towards them. So with that, what they want to do is, as an abuser with a superiority complex, make a habit of belittling their victims in order to make himself or herself feel superior. So in my case, my Count Von Narcula wanted to make himself feel superior by provoking, gaslighting, eroding my professional pentameter. I had to catch my breath. That's what you heard. That. So the thing is, when you're thinking about all of that, and I had to go for a second because this is the emotional part. This is where Count Von Narcula will exhibit levels of torture, psychological, lethal things, and doing all kind of things to provoke gaslight. And then people don't want to believe that Count Von Narcula will do that. So then by the time the Duke of Narcula and Count Von Narcula want to keep this up, everybody is looking at the person who's not a narc as the problem because they're exhibiting reactive abuse syndrome or narcissistic abuse syndrome from an APD, MPD, so antisocial personality disorder, or a narcissistic personality disorder inclined narc. So then if you also have a person who's not on the spectrum and they're just below that, they're a toxic emotional abuser. So they're not a narc, but they are a emotional abuser. So they're sitting in that spectrum category of a toxic person. So they can't be diagnosed as a narcissist or sociopath or narcopath or psychopath sociopath. So they're literally flying underneath the radar. So the red flags they exhibit are still prequels to the sequel of narcissism on the neurotic side, but they're not there yet. But they're eliciting that in the divorce. So with that, they're boosting themselves while putting you down. So, in a professional standpoint, say for example, me as a coach, when I got Duke Von Narcula, and then I got Count Von Narcula next, and then I've got the Esquire Von Narcula, if he's a lawyer doing this, then what is he going to do? He's going to side on the rest of the narcs because each one doesn't like me. Because I'm calling out the behaviors, right? So look at Betty Broderick when she's calling out her husband's behaviors. So he's out for revenge. He's spiteful, he's vengeful, and borderline really wanting to erode her mental health, professional health, and how she looks out there to everybody else, right? So in my case, it would be me. I would be like the stepping in the shoes of Betty Broderick. That's what I meant by that. So I'm not Betty Broderick, though. I haven't done what she's done. So when you're talking about me as a professional outlook, what is Count Von Narcula doing, or the Duke of Narcula doing? It means that the Duke of Narcula wants me to look crazy, wants people not to believe what I'm saying. But he's elicited technology abuse. He's rewired numbers to every other place of business but my business. And he had no business going to vendors doing this, but he's elicited levels and depths of psychological abuse, torment, provoke, gaslight, done it for 72, 48 hours or more. But he's redirecting phone lines, trying to emotionally abuse and cause a nervous breakdown, but that's not going to happen, right? Because I've learned how to cope with his narcissistic abuse and his extreme levels of toxic narcissism. So that's like that will behave, right? So we're thinking about all the levels and depths of Count Von Narcula, or the Duke of Narcula, or the Duke and Duchess of Narcula. So then when we're talking about those levels of that, and we're talking like how, like at PBD, Megan Pillar Darling, who didn't do her job, or we're talking about Detective Stone, who didn't do his job, or, you know, you're thinking about Detective Clinton, who didn't do his job, and we're talking about Officer Galiti that didn't do his job, or Detective Stone that hung up the phone in my face plenty of times, but my narc worked for the police department. So now you understand the levels and depths of pentameter of how that's being done. But then when you trace the IT hacks, IP hacks, it's going down to the sheriff's department, police department, where the prior narc daddy worked for the sheriff's department. So you're looking at how a narc will sit there and provoke and gaslight because they have buddies at the police force, or they have people who don't like you, or they'll recruit other people to do their dirty work but erase their tracks. So that's where you have the Count of Narcula, or the Duke of Narcula, or the Duke and Duchess of Narcula. You know what I mean? Narc A and Narc B. Okay? So when you have an abuser like that who feels it's okay to do that, we're talking about superiority complex, that they feel that they can make a habit of belittling their victim or the target of their obsession or fatal vows or fatal attraction. Like I said, like the ID channel, the American monster, basically he's an American monster, a provoker, a gaslighter. So Count Von Narcula is mad because everybody knows now that he's a narc. He's a sociopath, psychopath, or toxic emotional abuser or tormentor. And Count Von Narcula knows that I no longer want him. Or in Betty Broderick's case, she no longer wants her husband. She just wants alimony to take care of her kids. But Count Von Narcula, her husband, does not want her to be able to have the kids because he doesn't want to pay alimony. So same thing with a wealthy narc who doesn't want to pay for his indiscretions. So they will belittle their victims and make themselves feel superior. They will draw attention to their partner's smallest flaws to make them hyper aware of their insecurities, or what they'll try to make them feel insecure about. So not only will they sit there and provoke, IT hack, IP hack, eavesdrop, parrot, have other people parrot conversations, sit there in a dinner or a session doing that, or they'll sit there and bribe other people to provoke and gaslight and do things, just like Jamon Johnson told my neighbors when I was living in the state that I was living in to tell lies on me. Linda Archie, and Larry and Linwood that lived across the street from where I lived at that point in time when he was domestically terrorizing me and getting in my house. So those are examples of how Count Van Narcula or the Duke of Narcula would sit there and do that. So now you understand how that feels when somebody's sitting up there provoking gaslighting, but I'm a professional. I've got a bachelor's degree. So it doesn't matter if you have a bachelor's degree, it doesn't matter if you have a master's degree, it doesn't matter if you have a doctorate. There's people who are in positions of levels of having doctors where they have PhDs and they go through this. So it doesn't matter about your levels of education. It matters about how far the narc will go to their smear campaign and the entitlement they feel to emotionally abuse and torment. The entitled emotional abuser expects to always receive special treatment, even such treatment that is not actually earned or even deserved. This type of person usually does not feel as though they must play by the rules, and they may feel malaligned when expected to abide by the ordinary code of conduct or code of professional conduct. So do you think it's professional for a narc to sit there and redirect phone lines or do telecom violations or FCC violations, SEC violations, antitrust violations by coming after me and doing that? No. The narc doesn't care. All he's wanting to do is elicit frustration and trying to force a nervous breakdown. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is the restraining orders, lifetime restraining orders, or level of court orders for him to stop, and eventually state hospital visits for him, permanent. So that's where that goes with that. But that's where lawyers have to step in and absolutely see that, and absolute PIs have to see that. And that's where police officers have to be trained in what Count Von Narkula will do. Or if he's absolutely wealthy and he's got police buddies that will race his tracks, then what do you have to do? You have to do internal investigation at the police department as to why Count Von Narkula can do whatever he wants to do and erase his tracks. Just like I had exes that were police officers' sons. So now you understand how that goes hand in hand. So you have to find a level of ethics and balance there. I'm not saying that all police departments are like that. I'm not saying police are like that. But when you have a level of corruption within, then that poisons all the bad levels that go on in a police department that shouldn't normally happen, and it normally doesn't, and I'll go on record saying that. But the good officers end up being outshined by a bad officer who is making it clear that I'm going to do this. I'm going to continue to provoke. I'm going to continue to gaslight. Anybody that stands up against me, you're going to be fired. Or they'll sit there and provoke and gaslight even within or bully other officers who don't like what's going on. Because one thing I can say is officers who realized that it was an intentional abusive situation, they started apologizing. I'm sorry you're going through this. This is not fair. This is not okay. So it began to make me change my mind about police departments, sheriff's departments, when police officers, sheriff's departments were like, look, I'm sorry. You don't deserve this. So that's that sense of entitlement that an emotional abuser will do. Or a wealthy person who has connects to do that will call, hey, homeboy, erase my tracks. Oh, hey, homeboy, do this. Or homegirl, do this. Go look at her record so I can talk to her in her face about her record. How would the narc Count Von Narcula know about my record unless you went in it? So that's the examples of how that happens. So then we're talking about control. Lastly, control is a primary tool used to effectuate emotional abuse. Abusers seek to make their victims powerless or seem crazy. That's where you get where the victim gets tired, and if they can't go through police departments, and they call their governor, their AG, and they go through levels of chain of command like I did, and they're not getting anywhere, or they call DCNF like I did, and nothing is going anywhere, and everybody's hanging up phones in your face. So then that goes to where there's levels of advocates and people who have to step in on your behalf, because it's levels and depths of everybody's dropping the ball. Why? How come you're not doing your job? Why? That's where it goes, where adequate protections have to come in place for people. Adequate educations have to come into place for police departments who are not well trained or well versed in narcissism and emotional Munchausen by proxy or emotional abuse, torment, torture, and provoking and gaslighting. Psychological warfare that's not normal in a regular civilian situation or domestic living situation, because nobody should ever have to go through that offboarding from a marriage, bad marriage, whether it's good or bad, or whether they're divorcing someone and someone's becoming a toxic emotional abuser or using emotional abuse as a tactic to sit there and win custody or circumvent child support or things like that. So you have to think about it. It's easier for the abuser to coerce a victim who has no power to leave, to get help or fight back. To take this power from the victim, the abuser seeks control over key aspects of the victim's life, say professional, personal, and even at that, if it's overlapping personal and professional, to crazy make. So then you're going to like examples of what happened to me. And I share this with you because I love sharing with you all, so you guys can go through this and go through it and grow through it. And you'll understand that there is a coach out here who understands, because this coach went through it and I'm surviving it. And it's just really the aftermath of surviving domestic terrorism, domestic abuse, and intimate partner violence. And the hardship of it is dealing with the emotions post abuse and the remote abuse that continues to go on. And the thing is, it's the other narcs by proxy that are mad because they did his dirty work or did her dirty work, and then now they're mad because they have to be held accountable. And there's nothing worse than somebody having to be held accountable in a position of power that abused their power to do something to someone, and they don't want to be held accountable. So what does that happen? It continues to go on post offboarding, divorcing, leaving. So that's where you get the levels and depths of where you have narc by proxy and flying monkey abuse, and the levels and depths of narcissism that continues to go on, multi-perpetrator violence. And that's where that needs to be prosecutable. And where you have to look at that and coercive control, economic abuse, financial abuse. And we'll go into the next session, the next time we talk about financial abuse and how that works and things like that. And that's why we have those classes on the DonDiva coaching packages and Team World online packages for adolescents who are dealing with that, because adolescents get affected in divorces with that, where economic abuse happens and where you see the levels of nature versus nurture, and then where it's fight or flight syndrome comes in, and where the children become affected by the narc parent versus the nurturing parent. Then you've got Count Von Narcula, who wants to stick it to the kids and hurt the parent by not paying child support or doing things like that. So now you understand what coercive control and Count Von Narcula and the financial abuse. You know, you have to laugh to keep from crying. That's why I do that. And I want you guys to understand it's a serious situation, but we have to laugh sometimes in between to keep the tears from rolling down our face. So when you're thinking about that, and if you want to think about the flying monkeys, think about the Wizard of Oz, and we're not in Kansas anymore, and we're Dorothy. She clipped her shoes, and she's like, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. And then you got the Wicked Witch of the West, and then you got the Good Witch of the East. And when you're thinking about that, what are the flying monkeys? They're the bad flying people that fly around and enable the witch and all her bad doing, right? So then you got Glinda the Good Witch, right? So when you're thinking about that from east to west, and you're thinking about a narc, how far they will take their levels of coercive control from west to east, east to west, and do all this and drag other people into their business affairs, private affairs, professional affairs, and then their marital affairs, what do you think happens? What do you think happens to the victim? They become psychologically punched from everybody. Then you're thinking about the emotional screams. And then we're talking about psychological punches. Scream. And while you're going through all of that, and the coercive control, financial abuse, economic abuse, and we'll go on those in pentameter, the next session, offboarding from divorcing and whatnot, so that you guys understand the levels and depths of the abuse outside of divorce, but abuse as a whole, and how people have to end up seeing people like me who are certified coaches, and as I become an MD, and you'll see me diagnosing you with the different things like I was talking about, the APD and the MPD, and the levels of where you're going to be diagnosed with BPD. Most of you victims won't have the MPD or the APD, because by the time that's all said and done, most of y'all aren't narcs. The narcs are the ones who have the APD, MPD, right? But say your spouse comes in, but seen by the doctor, and we need to see who's actually the aggressor. The spouse might be the APD, MPD, you might be the BPD, which is the borderline personality disorder, which is the result of reactive abuse syndrome and narcissistic abuse syndrome, because you're reacting to what your narc spouse is doing. So it doesn't mean that you're always bipolar, which is somewhere it sits on the pentameter and looks the same. And a lot of people don't understand that. So when that narc calls you bipolar, bipolar where? Oh, she's mentally ill. You mean the convenient way that most narcols do to their spouses, or have them hopped up on medication, or sometimes they end up resorting to medication because they're exhibiting BPD from being psychologically abused and psychologically punched. I'll wait. Looks like I've been knocked. Looks like you broke your spouse. So there you have it, you guys, with economic abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, and emotional abusers. So we're going to wrap this session up for you guys to understand how this can affect someone long term and how you end up in a coach's office, how you end up in a mental health facility sometimes, or how the best of us can end up like that and misdiagnosed and misdoxed if you don't have a specialist or a specialty clinic or specialty coach who's able to go say, hey, you need to go see our doctor over here next door, and we need to go and see what's going on. And then they forensically can do the legwork. And then we can sit down and I bridge the gap and we start really getting together and we start seeing some results and you getting better. Even though you might long term be on medicine long term, you might be seeing me for the next 15, 20 years. That's just fine. Love to see you. I take insurance, cash, credit, and charge. Love you. Love you all. I love what I do as a coach. So therefore, I want you guys to understand it's no laughing matter. Abuse is no laughing matter. But I wanted to lighten up the mood and give you guys that illuminated feeling that you can get there and we can get to a point where you can laugh at this one day. Right now, it's not laughing matter. And right now, you're in recovery mode. Right now, all of you who have gone through this need to be able to feel like somebody understands. So I'm here for that. So with that, we've gone through why sometimes offboarding and divorcing someone financially, emotionally, mentally is for your best interest in your mental health and your emotional health. Even though you might be seeing a mental health professional or paraprofessional like myself, until I get that certification as a doctor and a licensure, and then my doctors that are sitting up there under the staff and guiding me in that till I get with all my CEUs and my credits, then you'll understand what it's like and you'll understand that you're in the best care and the best hands because I'm bridging the gap where you won't be seeing the doctors all the time, but you'll be seeing them in between med management and all of that. And then you'll be seeing the pharmacy and things like that to get your prescriptions filled and you'll be able to sit there and say, okay, I can finally deal with it even though I've been narked. So, I love you all to life and back. I'm going to take you out of here with some good music. I want you to understand, I am somebody. I am going to recover. I am going to heal. Everything will be okay. You just have to get there from here and understand the levels and pentameter of reducing the risk and moving on. But you've got to commit to going to see a coach, your doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and continue to go on your journey. Thank you for attending.